Well, hey, my name is Ryan, and you're watching Creative Sound Lab, a weekly video show where audio recording is an art form. Well, this week's episode is really going to be giving 3 of my best kept secrets of the gear that I use here at Lumen Audio, my commercial recording studio in downtown Canton of North Carolina. These are really kind of a secret weapon for my recording style and my recording workflow. And I'd really like to kind of show you a few pieces of gear I just can't live without. And these 3 pieces of gear cover guitar, vocal, and drum. So kind of the big 3 of recording and mixing. And I'd love to share with you these 3 items, walk through what they do, how I use them, and maybe how you can use them in your studio. At the end of the video, I'm also going to be giving 3 items that are $10 and less. So, things that you can build on your own or things that you can find for around $10 or less. They've really helped me out a lot. Kind of like a B list of today's episode. That'll be at the end, kind of a variation for you. Let's start out with the 3rd secret weapon for recording. Okay, so this is a Superphonic snare drum by Ludwig. This is the super sensitive model. And basically what that means is the snares stretch actually over the bearing edge and go out to the sides here. This is really kind of a weird thing. If you were 13 when I got this drum, you would see this and say it looks nothing like what the drummers and modern drummer are using, for example. And so I never played it. I've had it literally as long as I've been playing drums, and I just never grew a liking to it. But eventually over time I realized, wow, this is an amazing drum. This is a classic drum. And the snare drum really matters so much in the studio. And I think part of the reason is because the snare drum sits right in the middle range of frequencies. The human hearing is most sensitive to those mid frequencies, right? 2, 3, 4K. And so really you change out the snare drum, it sounds like you're changing out the whole kit. And I think why is because the snare drum occupies so much of the frequencies that drums produce. You have some of the low frequencies. I've boosted like 100 hertz before out of my snare mic. I've boosted 8K or 5K, It didn't go as high as the cymbals, and it didn't go as low as the kick, but the snare drum really covers a lot of range, more so than probably any other drum. So you change out the snare drum, and it sounds like you're changing out the kit. And when you get the snare right, when you get it really good sounding, then your whole drums sound good. When your drums sound good, your production value goes up. So the whole recording sounds better. Now, one thing interesting about snare is that it's really hard to fake. Cymbals are hard to fake too. Good cymbals, they're really hard to fake. You either have them or don't. But say kick drum, you can easily just throw a pillow in the kick drum and get a tight, punchy sound. Easy enough, right? For toms, if you can't get a really full sound, you could muffle them a little bit and still get something that works. But for a snare, if the snare sound really is bad, it's really difficult to get it sounding great in the mix. You have to pretty much start on the day of tracking and get your snare sounds right at the drum level, at the tracking level. And then when you go to mix, you have good sounds to work with. So that's why I think the snare drum has been so important to the way that I work, the way that I record here at the studio, and really have a strength in the drum tracks. Okay, so for my next piece of gear is really my Harmony H303A. And here's the front of it. Here's the back. Really, really tiny little amp. I wouldn't even say but probably a couple watts. Little 6-inch speaker inside. And this thing is amazing for getting really dirty vocal sounds. So if I need like a Black Keys kind of vocal sound, I can easily just reamp through this amp and put a mic right on it, and even put a room mic in the room. I could put my R88 stereo room mic in the room and get 3 channels and get a really cool sound. For whatever reason, this amp is awesome at vocal. It could do a few other things as well, but it is perfect for vocal, just that mid-range quality. It doesn't actually compress the sound a whole lot. It keeps a little bit of the dynamics in, so it doesn't really squash the sound. It's really good at actually recording sounds with Something like a 635A that has a really mid-rangey sound is a dynamic mic. Of course, the SM57, 421. I've even used a 414 on this amp and had this amp barely, overdriving to that vocal, and it just gave it some grit. And it was almost to the point where it sounded like maybe there was a filter or something on his voice, but it wasn't like too obvious. So this amp, I do a lot of vocal through this amp. Chick vocal, rock vocal, perfect for this amp. Then what I've done is put some delay on it. I've put delay on the room mics that I have. And so basically what I'm doing is I don't know if worldizing is the term, but I'm taking things out of the DAW and putting them into the real world where there's air and there's sound waves, and then I'm recapturing them. So I'm running them through a circuit, I'm running them through the actual air in the studio and recapturing those sounds, and they're going to be shaped differently by all those factors. And by the time they go back into the DAW, I have a much more unique effect than I could just by running it through a quick plugin. So a lot of times what I would do for that room mic is I'll throw on maybe a 60 millisecond delay and kind of back it down and compress it kind of hard. And you get a really thick and full but kind of distorted delay room sound. And it kind of sounds like a reverb, but it kind of doesn't. You can also just not do that at all and just keep it right on the vocal and get a really loud sound. So it sounds like the recording was made at like a club or something. And that's cool too, because it's like a very live sounding recording. That would be more for like a Gary Clark Jr. type sound. He has a song called Numb, and boom, I would totally use this amp for that kind of sound. So Gary Clark Jr., the Black Keys, those types of sounds are made with this amp. And it's perfect for it. I probably would never ever record a guitar through it, but it's awesome for vocal. And I bet you back in the day, they probably played harmonica through it. If you think about it, the range of the harmonica is right there with vocal. So this is a great little amp, the Harmony H303A. Okay, so I was thinking about this, and really I was thinking about my reamping box for this slot. I was thinking, man, I use this thing all the time, and it's great. It does have a single use though. Okay, it does one thing really well, and it gets line level signals out of the DAW into the real world, into guitar amps, into guitar effects pedals, and then of course I can use a DI box to go back in, to record back in those same sounds. With a guitar amp, obviously I'd be using a mic and a preamp, but really, this is kind of the way in, this is kind of the way out. And in a recent episode, I've been doing a lot of different tests on, do you really need a DI box to reamp guitar? And I did a few tests, I had a few theories, and I realized that this guy actually makes a great reamping box. Now, I've done tests, you can listen to the audio if you really think that I'm nuts here, but it really does work. Now, the problem with this as a reamp box is that it's really optimized to go, one direction. And so when we're using this as a reamp box, we're basically sending signal backwards through it. And so one way that I've combated that, and my tests show this, is that you can actually use a padded cable so that you don't overload this transformer. And you can still run your converters at a little bit more optimum level. Because, I think I was turning it down to like -30, -40. I think in real life, in a real session, I was doing this where I had to turn it down to like -60 or something ridiculous. So it was nearly all the way down on the fader just to get this from peaking. And so through my test, I figured out I could use a padded cable to bring up my converters a little higher on my output and not overdrive this signal. But my test showed that, hey, you know what? It's got a pad on it. So 15 dB pad for guitar, I found that it actually works pretty well. And, of course, I can go in on this. So here's why I'm choosing this DI as kind of my number one secret weapon. Is, for one, it can go in. But really what it's about is this through jack. So instead of just saying a DI like, hey, we're going to record bass and you can play bass in the control room and okay, whatever. But with this, with a through, I can just sneak this in to any line, any signal line going to an amp. I can put it after the pedals. I can put it before the pedals. This is basically an input-output, just like a pedal. So you just stick it wherever you want to capture the signal, and then run this into a preamp and record that. And it basically captures the sound, either pre or post pedals, but most importantly, before that amp. And then what we can do is we can later go back and reamp, change out the amp, change out anything that came after this. But what I've learned is that, okay, this has got a pad. I can use a padded cable. It's really quite doable, and it really makes this very, very versatile. One quick note is that my Type 85 didn't work, okay? I mean, it's an active DI. It's really got to be passive for it to work. That way, it literally can't say no to you. It's just going to pass signal backwards. And it may not be optimum. That's the reason for the pad. So really, this is kind of what it comes down to, is I love to reamp. I love to get sounds in the real world. I love to do, reverb chambers, okay? Even with the studio monitors, I can move those in here and fire acoustic guitar to get a more three-dimensional effect, or I can reamp vocal through the Harmony H303A. So really, this can get me anything. Now, I know I've said this gets a lot of use, but really, if you had to pick one, a passive DI with a through jack is an excellent choice to do kind of the recording style that I promote a lot of hands-on sound getting, tone shaping using lots of guitar amps, guitar effects, all those sorts of things. So really, this is my number one secret weapon, is a passive DI like this. So hey, sorry it's a kind of an anticlimactic thing, but sometimes the simplest things really do work great. Okay, so those were really my secret weapons for recording. And this is just really about my process. Your process could be totally different. And that's really cool. That's why this is an art form. It's really not how you get there or what you do to get there, but really the end result and what you're communicating through the music that we're a part of. And so what I'd love for you to do, if you have essential gear that you just can't live without, it's your own secret weapon for your own recording style, post them below. I'd love to hear what your essential gear is. Maybe it's a plugin, maybe it's a mic, maybe it's a guitar pedal, or even an instrument. I'd love to hear your top 3, and go ahead and post them below. Also, don't forget to pick up that free PDF download. It's the 10 cool things you can do with a passive DI box. And this is just something to inspire you. If you're feeling uninspired one day, you can just read through 10 different ideas of what you can do with a single piece of gear. Anyways, I'll talk to you soon, and I'll see you next week.